Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday evening Bible study here with the Nicholasville Church of Christ. I hope everyone's having a good week so far. We have spent the past 3 weeks in our series of Mark looking at different portions of Mark's gospel and asking the question, what is the kingdom of God like? And as we looked at Jesus' teachings and also his actions, we have received some answers to that question. Well, tonight I want us to spend some time asking a different question. Who is Jesus? Now, this might seem kind of unnecessary to ask at first because, as you might remember, Mark has already told us who Jesus is right at the beginning of his gospel. In the very first verse, he tells us that Jesus is the Messiah and he is the Son of God. But you may remember that while we know who Jesus is, many of the figures in Mark do not know. And this is something that they will come to know as the gospel unfolds. Sometimes it can surprise us that people around Jesus didn't simply see his miracles and hear his teachings and immediately recognize who he was. Sometimes we can almost just shake our head in amazement at how thick the people around Jesus can seem, including his own disciples. But let's remember that it is easier for us to pick up on who Jesus is because we already know. The idea of Jesus being a Messiah who lived life as a servant and who was crucified and resurrected, this is commonplace for us. But this was not commonplace at all before Jesus came on the scene. And what we'll look at tonight will give us a glimpse of how Jewish people living in Galilee in the first century, how they first reacted when they were confronted with Jesus and with his mission. So the first place I'd like us to turn is to Nazareth. This is Jesus' hometown. Matthew and Luke will both add that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but it's clear in all of our gospel accounts that Nazareth is the village or the town where Jesus grew up. So let's read when Jesus goes to his hometown, goes to Nazareth, in Mark chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. I'll read verse 1 and the first part of verse 2. He went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. So Jesus is teaching in the synagogue of his hometown on the Sabbath, and we read that people are astonished by Jesus. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Jesus is, after all, someone who provokes wonder and amazement, so it makes sense that they would be astonished. But let's keep on reading here, and we'll read beginning with the second part of verse 2. They were saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is this wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. So here we learn that this astonishment is not good. They take offense at Jesus. And notice what they are asking. Where did Jesus get these things? They do not dispute that he is wise. They do not dispute reports that were apparently circulating of the miracles he's been reporting. They don't dispute the truthfulness of these things, but the question is, where did he get these things? And there are other questions that they ask here help clarify this first question. They say, isn't this man a carpenter, the son of Mary? Do we not know his brothers? And aren't his sisters here? Aren't they right here with us? It's important to remember that Nazareth is a tiny village, so there's good reason for everyone to know everyone and everyone to know everybody's business. And so it seems like what is basically going on is that the people of Nazareth are affronted that someone they know who comes from such a small, humble town like Nazareth, that someone they know thinks that he is important enough to go around teaching about God and performing miracles. It sounds like they consider Jesus to be reaching beyond his station in life, and they consider him to be arrogant for trying to do that. Well, notice Jesus' reply. Let's look at verses 4 through 6. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching." So notice Jesus' reply. It's a proverb-like statement. Prophets are honored in other areas, but not in their own hometown and by their own families, family members, and neighbors. And so while what Jesus says seems to just acknowledge that this is reality, notice also verse 6, he marvels at their unbelief. The people were astonished at Jesus' teaching, but Jesus is a bit astonished that they don't accept his teaching. And he doesn't do many miracles there. This might remind us of what Jesus says in his teachings. He says, "For to the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." If the people do not want to believe, Jesus is not going to bend over backwards to convince them. It is those who are open to his message who will receive more reason to put their trust in that message. Now, Mark actually says that Jesus could not do many miracles in his hometown. It doesn't just say he did not or he chose not to. It says he could not. Now, at face value, this verse could be taken to mean that Jesus' power was constrained against his will. But as the rest of the Gospel of Mark shows, Jesus' power is immense. I think that Mark has chosen, in wording it this way, he has chosen a strong way to highlight the connection between faith and Jesus' works by saying that Jesus could not do many miracles. Jesus has chosen to limit his miracles to those who are open to receiving them with faith. So the lack of faith means Jesus cannot do many miracles according to Jesus' own guidelines. And so in that sense, he cannot do many miracles in Nazareth. Earlier in Mark, Jesus' family thought that he was out of his mind. We read that a few weeks ago. And so this lack of faith from his own hometown probably shouldn't surprise us all that much. So for Jesus, home is not a welcoming place. In answering who is Jesus, his hometown wants to say, well, he's nothing more than the carpenter we all know. That's what they want to say. Now, there may be some foreshadowing here of what is to come later in Mark. Jesus is rejected by his own people in Mark 6, and by the end of Mark, he will be rejected by his own people in a broader sense. Jerusalem rejects him, the Jews reject him, and he is crucified. So we know the reaction of Jesus' hometown, but what about other people in Galilee? We've already mentioned that great crowds are following them. So what about them? How would they answer this question, who is Jesus? Well, we get a brief reaction of the people in the midst of the series of controversies that we looked at a few weeks ago that Jesus is engaged in with the religious leaders. We read this after Jesus heals the paralytic who is let down through the roof of Jesus' house by his friends. This is in chapter 2 and verse 12. And he, the paralytic, he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." So this is a much more positive reaction. Jesus' hometown folks, they are astonished and they are offended. But here the people are amazed and they glorify God. They are seeing things they have never seen before. But as Jesus basically tells us in chapter 4, they will see more things like this if they respond in faith. Jesus may not perform many miracles in Nazareth because of unbelief, but if people will remain open to who Jesus is and what his mission is and what he is doing, they will see more amazing things like this. But notice that this statement by the crowd is short of professing complete allegiance to Jesus. These people do not immediately fall on their knees and declare him to be Lord and God. They are grasping that something significant is happening, but they are not grasping the whole picture. They do not know what Mark has told us right at the beginning about Jesus. They do not know that he is the Messiah and that he is the Son of God. In another instance of Jesus performing a miracle in chapter 5, we see a very different reaction. After Jesus heals a man who has been horribly oppressed by many demons, the people of the area actually beg Jesus to leave their region. And it's worth mentioning that Jesus, in this instance, is in a region that is largely non-Jewish. This healing occurs in what Mark calls the country of the Gerasenes. And we'll look at this healing, at this exorcism, in later classes in more detail. But the main thing to note for tonight is this is Gentile territory. And so this might help explain the desire on the part of the people for Jesus to leave. They will not be looking at what Jesus is doing through the same lens that a devout Jew would. And so they see what Jesus is doing, and they just want him to leave. So among the masses of the people that Jesus interacts with, among the crowds, he may often get a favorable reaction from doing things like healing and casting out demons. But even then, even among these people, a favorable reaction is not always guaranteed. So when asking the crowds of people who Jesus is, their answer so far is largely summed up as Jesus is someone amazing. And depending on who they are, their amazement will either lead them to glorify God or distance themselves from him. But clearly, he's someone amazing. And that's all that they really seem to grasp so far. But what about Jesus' disciples? What of those who were closest to him, including the 12 apostles whom he specifically selected to represent him? How would they answer this question, who is Jesus? Well, right after the first major portion of teaching that we looked at a few weeks ago, we read of Jesus getting into a boat with his disciples. And this is the famous event of Jesus and his disciples being caught in a storm at sea. And while the storm is so bad that the disciples think that they're going to perish here in the sea, Jesus, in the meantime, is fast asleep. And when the disciples awaken him, Jesus calms the sea, saying, "Peace, be still." And what follows this great storm is a great calm. And notice the response of the Pharisees in verse 41 of this event. Verse 41, "And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So they are filled with fear, and they're saying, who is this person? What type of person can just command the wind and the waves and be still? Their reaction is not very different from the more positive reaction of the crowd that we observed earlier. And it's important to note that their confusion might be more understandable than we sometimes give them credit for. Again, sometimes we just think, how can the disciples be this unperceptive, this thick to not see who Jesus is? Well, some Jews thought that angels controlled the weather of the world, and there are writings from close to this time that reflect that belief. But everyone knew who the angels ultimately answered to. They ultimately answered to God, even if the angels could direct the weather of the world. So to have some confusion about who Jesus is on the basis of just calming the sea, that confusion kind of makes a little bit of sense. But clearly they know that they are dealing with no average human when they interact with Jesus. Now, we know that they are dealing with the Messiah and the Son of God. This is something, again, Mark has told us at the very beginning. But the disciples are only getting glimpses of this reality right now. So the people Jesus interacts with are struggling to put their finger on who exactly they are dealing with Jesus. His hometown rejects him. The people are amazed by him, and the disciples are in fear and amazement as well. But they all at least know that they are dealing with someone extraordinary. It might be easy to assume that Jesus is really eager for everyone to finally grasp who he is. This seems like the type of thing that would really help his mission and help his ministry along. But something that we find in Mark is that Jesus actually contributes to all of this uncertainty by trying to keep things quiet. He doesn't always want his actions and what his actions might say about him. He doesn't always want these things spreading around for everyone to hear. Notice what Jesus tells a leper after he heals him. This is verses 42 through 44 of chapter 1. I'm just going to read verse 44. "And Jesus said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, for a proof to them.'" We see this same command to keep things quiet when Jesus raises Jairus' daughter that we looked at a few weeks ago. This is chapter 5, verse 43. "And he, Jesus, strictly charged them that no one should know this. And he told them to give Jairus' daughter, who he just raised from the dead, give her something to eat." After Jesus heals a deaf person in chapter 7, we read that he again commands for this to be kept quiet. But this time we read that people end up spreading the word around about this anyway. So what is all this about? This is a theme that is in Mark that is commonly called the messianic secret. the messianic secret. And this term is pretty self-explanatory. Jesus is not making his identity as the Messiah known to everyone right away. He's often working to keep this a secret. And this fits with something that we read while we were looking at Jesus' teachings. Jesus talked about the secrets of the kingdom of God. But why would Jesus want to keep his identity a secret? Maybe one explanation that you've heard before is that Jesus does not want word about him to get out of hand too quickly because he knows the type of opposition he will face from the religious leaders. And we've already read him facing some of that opposition. Well, the more public Jesus becomes, the stronger and more intense the opposition will become as well. So Jesus might be waiting for the right time for this amount of publicity to be part of his ministry, and that time just hasn't occurred yet. The idea of waiting for the right time also fits with some things that we talked about concerning what the kingdom of God is like. The kingdom of God has humble beginnings, but then it grows into something magnificent. This is something that we have observed in previous weeks. The kingdom of God has secrets, but those who listen well will get more insight into those secrets. These things fit with Jesus keeping his identity secret for now. Jesus' ministry begins shrouded in mystery and causing confusion and amazement. And over time, things will become clearer and the veil will be lifted and people will come to know who Jesus is. And his resurrection and the preaching of the kingdom by the apostles afterwards, as we move beyond Mark and move into a book like Acts, his resurrection and the preaching, that will make it abundantly clear who he is. But this part of Jesus' ministry is the time of secrets, mystery, whispers, and it's the time of gradual understanding. So next week in our study in Mark, I'd like you to read these verses that are here on the screen, some verses from chapter 1 and from chapter 3 and chapter 5, and we will continue to ask this question, who is Jesus? And we will find some additional answers, and we'll find them in some surprising places. So I encourage you to read those passages, and we will discuss them next week. But thank you all again for joining us. Have a great rest of the week. Hope to see many of you on Sunday, and take care. Thank you.